And it's 10 o'clock, so we'll get ready to start this. So if you didn't have a chance to see what this live is about, it's about being a full-time yoga teacher. So I think sometimes it's difficult to get information about what it's like to teach yoga out there in the real world, and we might have an idea of what that maybe looks like, but it is something that I wish that I had known before I kind of started teaching yoga. I wish I knew some of the tips or the tricks or what the path might look like. So I thought this could be really useful. I think that probably over the years, other teachers have covered this in previous lives, but I know that sometimes it's hard to go back and to scan and to find the appropriate information. So for those of you for whom this applies at this moment in time, that's great. And thank you for joining me or watching back. So before we start, I just wanted to cover a couple of things. You might hear Diego wandering around. So today is all about teaching and what it's like to teach yoga full time. So I'm going to offer some of the thoughts that I have about this, some of the things that I learned along the way, some things you might consider implementing if you are choosing this career path. Sort of like, how do you develop a full-time teaching schedule? What's it like to maintain a full-time teaching schedule? Things like this. So we'll just dive in, and I have a couple of caveats that I'll get to as well. So teaching yoga classes, so the physical movement classes, was my primary job for many, many years, mostly pre March 2020. I think that's true for a lot of us. And before that, so prior to teaching yoga full time, I balanced it with other work that I did. So teaching music and teaching yoga were the two things that I did prior to moving to full-time teaching of yoga. I've always done other things on the side, but the primary source of my income for many, many years was teaching yoga movement classes. So during the pandemic, it shifted to, online, and has remained that way for me by choice. I know that's not the case. Lots of people have gone back to teaching in person. And then, doing course creation, development, other things to do with running online yoga schools and class platforms. So, and I've run the gamut from teaching 20 plus yoga classes a week, which might not seem like a lot, but I'll get into why that might be. And to anxiously saying yes to every single opportunity thrown my way. And then to teaching very few yoga classes and balancing that with other work. My journey is different than, I would say, most of the people I graduated from my first yoga teacher training program with, because I had someone in my life who'd already sort of done this, and that was Juan. And he had basically, in the years leading up to me taking my yoga teacher training, he had basically forged himself a career in full-time yoga teaching in the city that we lived in. So I was really fortunate because I basically sort of knew what to expect to some degree. And I sort of had someone there who helped me and guided me through the process. There's still lots of things that I learned because we're individual people with individual needs and requirements, but I definitely did have it a little bit easier than some of the people who I graduated with from the program, who it was a tough time getting started for some of them, I would say. So I'm hoping that this session is basically something or a little way to package up what I was gifted when I graduated from Juan, which was how to get started and how to build this up. So I'm learning from my mistakes, obviously, too, which mistakes of others are not just useful learning for the person, but also for those who we get to chat with and learn from. So before we jump into this, I just want to address a couple of things because they might come up during this discussion. And one of them is the rates of pay for yoga classes, and they're different everywhere. So it's impossible to come up with a standard, because everybody's living in different cities, the rent requirements are different in all these different places, the expectation is different. So any mention of money is just simply based on my own experiences teaching in the cities that I taught in, and it's no indication of what you should be paid or be asking for or not be paid or not be asking for. So if you're looking for that information about the rate of pay in the city that you live in, your best bet is to ask a fellow yoga teacher, or ask at a studio, or sort of Google online and try and find out, because it's impossible to say. And some of this is based on the rates of pay years ago, before things might have changed. I'm not sure. The second thing I wanted to just mention before we keep going was that what one person considers full-time work for another might not be enough, or it might be too much. Everyone's requirements for finding balance in their life are different. So mine are just an example of what worked for me and what I consider to be full-time, part-time, enough work. Oops, the cushion's falling there. Let's put it there. And that all of these suggestions are strictly based on my own experiences, my own needs, my own requirements for life, and that, again, this will be very different for everybody. So those are the three things I sort of wanted to cover and address before we dive into some of the details. And I will try and keep it sort of vague, because some things will just be so different. Okay, so what is a full-time yoga teacher? So essentially, it's where your primary source of income is from teaching yoga. And that doesn't mean just teaching yoga classes like studio classes, but this could be from doing workshops, it might be from doing retreats, it might be doing trainings, other work that's an extension of your yoga teaching. So maybe you have corporate meditation classes, or maybe you've started an online platform, or you have, an online presence of some sort. And, if you're maintaining a social media presence, and I don't know what, doing reels and things like this, like that is still your work. So basically, where the bulk of your income is coming from, your teaching and sharing of yoga in all the wonderful ways that we're able to do that. The question that we sometimes get is like, can you really be a full-time yoga teacher? And yes, you can. You totally can. And I know so many people who are full-time yoga teachers. And it really all comes down to the way you go about doing it, the place in which you live, your lifestyle for sure, and your energy. So let's just talk about those a little bit. So the place that you live, if you live in a very small town where there's just not a lot of yoga, it might be a little bit more challenging, not impossible by any means, but maybe it might take a little bit more creative thinking to have a full-time teaching career. If you live in a city where there's lots and lots of yoga studios and places to practice yoga, gyms, things like this, that might be a little easier. There also might be more competition, so we could say that just depends on the way that you look at it. Your lifestyle, so if you have a lifestyle that requires a certain amount of income, or that you need a certain amount of time to dedicate to other things, that's something to consider. And also your energy, the amount of energy that you have, I guess, each day or each week to be able to teach yoga. And we're all unique and individual in this. And I will offer, if I remember, a couple of tips later on for how to maybe manage this. So yes, you can totally teach full-time yoga, and it's a wonderful, wonderful career path. It's a wonderful way to spend each day. And I think I mentioned this in a previous live, but there's something just so, I don't want to say magical, but there's something really transformative about having that be your work. So you go and you teach yoga, and even if I was having a rough morning or wasn't feeling great, after I've taught a yoga class, and I've not really practiced, I've been teaching, but I just feel this sense of, I guess, serenity or tranquility after sharing yoga with others, and then doing that multiple times a day or multiple times a week really does feel like a symbiotic relationship, like those birds who sit on cows or those fish who go buy bigger fish, and they have this relationship where it's the mutually beneficial relationship. Is it secure work? So sure, I want to be a full-time yoga teacher, but is it reliable? And the answer is it depends. And it depends on, again, where you live in the world, and are you sort of relying on other people to give you teaching opportunities, or are you creating your own opportunities so you're sort of in the driving seat? And either way, it can be and it might not be. So I definitely have had shared with me experiences of people who are in careers that I would generally consider to be very secure, teaching in a school system or working in a hospital setting, and they've had experiences of insecurity in their work. So I think over the years I've sort of realized, I guess basically it's a Buddhist teaching that everything changes, and nothing is really secure or constant, and it's the ability to go with the flow and to adapt and to change that really gives that sense of security. If you know that you can be creative and adapt to the changes that are happening in your teaching life, in your career, then I would say then you carry with you your own sense of security, and that for me is the most important thing. So I started teaching by doing what most yoga teachers do, which is subbing. So where, if you're not sure what that is, it's where you're covering a class for the regular yoga teacher. And I know a lot of you are doing this. We spoke with someone in the Q&A yesterday who's already started doing that for their teacher, and that's, wow, that's an amazing experience. This is super common, and you can start by picking up a few classes. You know, you have a relationship with your teacher or a teacher, and they say, hey, I'm not going to be here next week. Would you mind teaching the class for me? And eventually this is in sort of a studio setting, I guess, or in a community center setting. And then eventually maybe a class opens up in that space, and because you've been subbing so much and you're a face and a presence in that community, they're like, hey, Mark, we've got this new Hatha class starting on Saturdays at 9 a.m. and we wondered if you'd be interested in taking it on. And then you're like, yes, of course I will. And then you're teaching that, you're subbing, and then another class opens up, or somebody leaves and they say, hey, do you want to take over this particular class? And then you keep doing that, and then eventually, after doing this, whether it's in one space or you're doing it in multiple different studios or community centers or gyms, eventually before you realize it, you've got a regular schedule. I'm always teaching 9:15 Tuesdays and Thursdays at this place. I teach corporate yoga in the afternoons on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I've got 3 back-to-back classes on a Saturday and some privates scattered in between this. And for me, it was amazing to realize that was my full-time job. I was teaching yoga. It was amazing. And so, of course, this is based on teaching yoga in sort of a studio type setting, and not just a yoga studio, but community centers and gyms and things like that. And I really enjoyed this way of teaching. And for the most part, it was very steady, very regular, and extremely flexible. So part of the benefit of teaching yoga full-time is its flexibility, because as you're picking up classes to sub for people, you can also find someone to sub your classes. And that's sort of, I guess, an expectation to some degree, is that if we're embarking on this career, that there is that flexibility inherently built into it. And then studios and community centers and gyms, I think they tend to mix up their schedules every once in a while, whether it's seasonally or yearly or things like this. So there will be changes. It's never going to be consistent for years and years and years. And the other wonderful thing is I was able to fit other interests around teaching yoga full time. So I could go for a singing lesson or head to the gym and things like this. So it felt really flexible and malleable around the life I wanted to create. So a typical full-time day for me looked like this. So 9:45 a.m., I've got a gentle hatha class at a studio in the downtown part of the city. And that usually, I guess, would run till about 11. And then at 12 o'clock, so I've got an hour to go and teach a corporate yoga class also downtown in the city. So in between, I might just grab a coffee or a quick snack or something like that, and then I'm teaching the 12 o'clock corporate class, which runs for about 45 minutes or maybe an hour. And then I've got a big break before I head to a studio on the other side of the city and teach a 5:45 p.m. hot yoga class. So I've got a really big break in my afternoon. I'd probably go home, do some other things, eat, sleep, exercise. And then at that same place, I've got a 7 p.m. yin yoga class to close out my day. So I've taught 4 classes that day. I tend to go to the gym before I start teaching, so I probably wake up pretty early and have my Spanish class or my singing lesson in the afternoon block that I have off, head home to eat, nap, take the dog out, do those things, and then head to my evening classes. That for me was a full day, and that usually would happen 2, maybe 3 times a week, that I'd have those big full days, basically from morning till evening with breaks, teaching yoga. And other days would be maybe 1 class a day, just in the morning or the evening, or maybe 2, but it was sort of like that. I tended for a long time to just keep 1 day off a week, completely off. And for me, that was Sundays. I found that teaching on weekends was popular. Students wanted classes on weekends because a lot of them were off on weekends. And that there was lots of requests to take classes for weekends. So, I mean, in an ideal world, I'd be off Saturday, Sunday, but I could manage to sort of keep Sundays as an non-negotiable. I'm not going to pick up any subbing on this day. I'm not taking on any regular classes that day. It was hard. It was difficult to say no to opportunities, but I found that if I say yes to everything, then you end up working, because it's happened. It wasn't forever like this, but you'd end up working for like every day for 6 weeks and then wonder why you were tired. Well, it's because you worked every day for 6 weeks. Even 1 yoga class takes energy out of you. So even if it's a 1-day class and you might think, well, I'm technically off, you're not really. You're still working. You're still holding space and giving energy. So I kept Sundays off, and so I tended to teach a morning class on Saturday, sometimes 2 back to back, and then I'd be off the rest of Saturday, all day Sunday, and teach again Monday morning. So I guess depending on the way that you look at it, that's technically a weekend. And I sort of averaged, a happy amount for me was about 15 classes a week, with some flexibility to pick up more classes as I wanted. If it wasn't a busy week, or if somebody needed coverage and it was a back-to-back class, or if it was a class that happened just before or after my class, I'd usually take those, because if I was able to, say, teach someone needed coverage for the 5:45 hot yoga class and I already had a 7 p.m. restorative class, then I was like, well, I'm going to be there anyway. I may as well go 2 hours early, teach their class, and then teach mine. Easy. But you can also not do that. You just pick up as you want. So that's sort of my example of what it was like teaching full-time yoga. And I know other teachers who focused, instead of the studio type classes that I focused on, they focused primarily on corporate yoga, teaching lunchtime classes and after work classes in a corporate yoga setting. And they generally, I think, if you're doing it yourself, they tended to charge much more. had very specific times that they were working, and that really worked for them. Other people who focused on privates, so they were teaching private yoga in people's homes or at a studio space they rented, they loved that. Other people who ran classes themselves at a community center, so doing classes in these sort of, I guess it's like semester blocks or community center kind of blocks of packages that they offer. So you do like 6 weeks of beginner hatha yoga, or maybe 8 weeks of vinyasa flow, intro to vinyasa, and these are usually prepaid ahead of time, so it's kind of nice. I sort of did a little bit of everything. I liked having a couple of privates a week, studio classes, community center classes here and there, and 1 or 2 corporate classes, and that mix worked really well for me. And eventually, after doing this, I noticed that I was sort of starting to specialize in certain areas of yoga. I noticed that I was getting a lot of students in my hatha classes and less students in my power classes. And then that when I started teaching yin and restorative, that those were really popular classes. And then I realized that I was getting offered more of those types of classes. So I started to specialize in more gentle styles of yoga. Coming back to that point that I said I'd talk about energy, I also found that when I started to teach gentler styles of yoga, that it helped me to conserve more energy through the day. So I was able to sort of feel more energized throughout my working week, as opposed to feeling super drained. So it's a lot of energy for me to teach a power or a flow class and even hot yoga. So specializing became really critical for me to be able to continue doing this. So if your yoga teaching path, it could be similar or really different to mine, but I really loved full-time teaching. It was hard on my body sometimes, which again, hence why I started to focus on the gentler styles of yoga. But it was always rewarding no matter what. And that's what I really love about teaching yoga, is that feeling that it gives you, that feeling of purpose and of helping, and really sort of fills you up. So I did this for years. What would I do differently? So what were some things that I wish that I had changed or change about doing this? So the first thing maybe is very specific to me, but just in case there's other people out there, I used to bike to every yoga class and to different studios, and I basically spend 2 or 3 hours of my day commuter cycling. I definitely wouldn't do this now, and I wish that I had realized that there was a better way to do it, like public transit or even just walking slowly, especially in the winter. So it would help me to conserve more energy for my work if I had maybe not biked so much. So I wish I'd maybe not done that. And I would also have focused more on getting back-to-back regular classes. So these are like gold in the yoga teaching world. When you get offered 2 classes that are consecutive, or sometimes 3 classes back-to-back, this is amazing. It's 1 trip to the studio, teach for 4-5 hours essentially with breaks in between, and then you leave. And that, for me, just teaching all morning or teaching all afternoon in the same place is like a gift. So, and I know that there were studios who were trying really to focus on doing that. Studios want variety on the schedule for students, so it's not something that is super easy to get, but it is out there. And I wish that I had focused more on cultivating those classes. And I would have focused more if I'd known on teaching private yoga, not just because of the rate of pay was much higher for private yoga, but I also found that it really helped to enhance and refine my teaching skills. And I wish that I'd started that sooner, because it was a little nerve-wracking and I was a little shy about it, but I think it sort of catapulted my skills in sharing yoga, and I wish that I had focused more on that. So now, if you're just getting started, on your teaching journey, here are some of the tips that I was given that I'm going to pass along to help you sort of cultivate a full-time schedule. And remember, this was years ago when I was doing this, so things, maybe they changed. I don't know how quickly things change in the yoga world, but this is just some things that I was really grateful some advice I was grateful to receive. So number one was find a community. Find an online community or an in-person community. Be part of that community. Practice, volunteer if they have karma, volunteers at the studio or at the community center or the gym, and just be part of it. Be interactive and I think that's like the number one thing to do is it's really difficult to get classes, yoga classes, whether subbing or regular, if nobody knows you. So be part of a community, online or in person. The second thing is it sounds funny, but befriend fellow yoga teachers. So you never know when a teacher will need a sub, and sometimes it's the teacher reaching out to get the sub. Sometimes it's the studio within their community of teachers, but create relationships, essentially. I guess it's network. And the third thing is let people know you are a yoga teacher. So it's how you get opportunities. I think it was Juan, when we moved to Toronto initially, there was a new studio that opened up, and he wanted to start working there. So he found out who the manager was of the studio, the person in charge, the director, and he went every time they had a class. He went and he asked questions, he introduced himself, he let them know that he was a teacher, and he just kept going, kept talking, asking questions, being a part of that community. And then eventually he was given the opportunity to sub, and then to get regular classes, and then he was working full-time in the studio. And so that's really, if you're interested in that particular area of teaching, that's really the way in. And then from that, the amazing thing is we got, both of us, through teaching at these places, then teachers would say, I had this private student and I'm no longer able to teach them. I thought you might be a great fit, so here's their information, maybe contact them. Or, hey, I also work at this studio and they're looking for teachers and I think the community would really get along with you. And it was like every opportunity we got, I'm going to speak for both Juan and I now, came from creating relationships and networking with other yoga teachers. And it's like that, it's just a seed, you're in one place, one studio, one class, and all of a sudden, this entire path opens up for you because you are interacting, because you are talking, you're asking, you're helping, you're doing all of these things, and that really is the way in. And then number 4 is think outside of the box. It's not just yoga studios and gyms, there's hospitals, schools, community centers, other things. So you can really teach yoga anywhere. I know a lot of people started teaching yoga in church basements because it was an affordable place to rent. So there's more than one way to do this. And then the fifth tip is say yes lots, but also say no. So know where your boundaries are, know where your no-go times are, what you're not willing to do. If you don't feel comfortable teaching a power class, then sorry, I'm not able to sub that class. Or if it's not a time of day that works for you, I'm sorry, I wish I could, I'm not able to teach that class. But I found that I said yes a lot, and sometimes to my own detriment. So I remember saying yes to a class that was just not my thing. It was subbing for a teacher I super respected, who had an amazing following of students. They were basically sort of looked at as the pinnacle of yoga in the community, and their students showed up regularly. They were all very advanced, and I was a new-ish teacher, and it was just a very nerve-wracking experience. I forgot poses. I got flustered and I just prepared for so long and I just felt so disappointed in myself, and I realized I just wasn't ready for that particular opportunity. So it's okay to say no, and not it's not your last opportunity. If you say no to subbing a class or to taking on a class, just trust that something else will come. It always has for me, and I'm sure that it always will for you. So that's essentially my little, I guess, chat on what it's like teaching yoga full time. And I know for some of you, this is not something you're interested in doing. You're taking this course and becoming yoga teachers for yourself, or to do this part-time, or all the different ways you can do it. But for those of you who are curious about full-time, then hopefully within this 30 minutes of me babbling on, that there's something useful and helpful within this. So as always, this will be posted on the Vimeo page to review later on. And yeah, I'm just really grateful. I'll just see if there's any comments before. Oh yeah, Janita says that, yeah, being able to say no is a good life lesson. It's so important, and it can feel, if you're not used to it, it was very hard for me to say no, but I felt empowered when I started saying no, and then another opportunity would come. You just have to be patient, and then something opens up. So yeah, such a good life lesson beyond teaching yoga. So thank you as always for joining me. My pleasure to sit and hold space here and chat with you all today, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. Take care.